Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Discovery and watched the massive space station grow larger on the main screen. Nexus Prime was bigger than any city he had ever seen. Metal towers stretched in all directions and thousands of ships moved around it like insects around a hive. This was the home of the Galactic Council, and humanity was about to join it. Drive Lisa Parker checked her instruments for the 10th time that morning. She was the ship's chief science officer, and she wanted everything to be perfect. Earth had worked for 20 years to build their first faster-than-light ship, and now they were finally here. The Council had invited them after humans proved they could travel between stars. Ryan Hughes sat at his communication station and listened to the dozens of alien languages coming from the station. His job was to translate, and he had spent months learning the basic Council language. Still, some of the voices he heard were completely strange and made sounds no human throat could make. The Discovery moved slowly toward a docking bay. Other ships were there too, but they all looked different from human designs. Some were long and thin like needles, while others were round like bubbles. One ship near them looked like it was made from living coral, and Jake could swear it was breathing. A voice came over the communication system, speaking in perfect English. It was deep and had a slight hissing sound. "Welcome, Discovery crew. This is Ambassador Keffer. We are honored to greet Earth's first diplomatic mission." Jake activated the reply system. "Thank you, Ambassador. We are excited to be here and to learn about the Council." The docking process took an hour. When it was finished, Jake gathered his senior officers. Besides Lisa and Ryan, he brought along Dr. Helen Carter, who was their medical officer. She would study alien biology and help keep the crew healthy. The four of them would represent all of humanity in these first meetings. They walked through an airlock and into the station. The gravity felt normal and the air smelled clean. But there was something else in it. Lisa noticed it first and whispered to Jake that there were extra chemicals that helped different species breathe the same air. The hallway they entered was huge, with a ceiling 30 feet high. The walls were covered in symbols from dozens of different alien languages. Ambassador Keffer was waiting for them. He was 7 feet tall, with green scaly skin and large golden eyes. His hands had long fingers that ended in small claws. When he smiled, Jake could see rows of sharp teeth, but his manner seemed friendly and welcoming. "Captain Morrison, I have heard much about your species," Keffer said as he extended one clawed hand. Jake shook it carefully. "Humans are known for being curious and determined. These are good qualities for Council members. We hope we can contribute to the Council's mission of peace and cooperation." Jake replied using the words he had practiced many times. Keffer led them through the station's corridors. They passed many different types of aliens. Some walked on 2 legs like humans, while others crawled or floated. A few seemed to be made of living metal or crystal. Most ignored the humans, but a few stared with what might have been curiosity or concern. The tour lasted 3 hours. Keffer showed them meeting halls where the Council made decisions, laboratories where alien scientists worked together, and living areas for diplomats from hundreds of worlds. Everything was impressive and peaceful, but Jake noticed something strange. The areas they were shown seemed prepared for their visit. The paths they took were specific, and several times Keffer guided them away from certain corridors. Without explanation, Dr. Parker asked many questions about the technology they saw. Some of the devices could heal injuries in minutes, while others could create any type of food instantly. But when she asked how they worked, Keffer gave vague answers about trade secrets and security concerns. When the tour ended, they were taken to their quarters. The rooms were comfortable and designed for human needs, but Jake noticed there were no windows to outside space. Ryan found that their communication equipment could only reach certain parts of the station's network. When he asked about this, he was told it was for security during their adjustment period. That night, Jake called a quiet meeting in his quarters. He spoke in whispers, even though they should have been safe in their own rooms. "Something feels wrong here," he told his officers. "Did anyone else notice how controlled our tour was?" Lisa nodded. "They showed us incredible technology, but wouldn't explain how any of it works." "And did you see how some of the aliens looked at us? Not with curiosity, but with something like pity." Helen had been thinking about the medical facilities they had seen. They had samples from many different species in their research labs. The collection looked complete, like they had genetic material from every council member. Ryan had tried to access more of the station's communication network after their tour. Our access is very limited. They say it's temporary, but it feels more like we're being isolated than protected. Jake looked at his team. They were smart people, and he trusted their instincts. Let's be careful and watch everything closely. Keep doing your jobs, but pay attention to anything unusual. We might be guests here, but I want to make sure we stay free guests. Outside their quarters, the station hummed with activity. Thousands of aliens went about their daily lives, in what seemed like a perfect galactic society. But in the shadows, between the bright corridors, things were not as peaceful as they appeared, and plans were already in motion that would determine humanity's future among the stars. Commander Amy Stevens sat in her office deep inside Earth's military headquarters and stared at the data streaming across her screen. For 3 days she had been monitoring all communications between the Discovery and Earth. Most of the messages were routine reports, but something was bothering her about the signal patterns. The official channels carried normal diplomatic updates from Captain Morrison and his team, but her equipment was also picking up other transmissions coming from the same area of space. These signals were encrypted and used frequencies that didn't match any known human or declared alien communication methods. Admiral Carl Bennett walked into her office without knocking. He was a tall man with gray hair and worried eyes, who had been in charge of humanity's first contact preparations for 5 years. "What do you have for me, Stevens?" Amy pointed to her screen where dozens of signal traces moved like electronic snakes. These encrypted transmissions started the moment our ship docked at Nexus Prime. They're not coming from the Discovery, and they're not using any protocols the Council told us about. Bennett studied the data. He had spent his career in military intelligence and knew the signs of secret communication. "Networks, can you break the encryption?" "I'm trying, but it's unlike anything we've seen before. The patterns suggest it's not just one conversation, but multiple parties discussing something they don't want others to hear." Amy switched to another screen that showed transmission timing. "Look at this pattern. Every time our crew asks certain types of questions, the secret traffic increases." Bennett didn't like what he was seeing. Before the Discovery had launched, he had received private briefings about potential risks in joining an alien alliance. Some military leaders worried that humanity might lose its independence. In exchange for advanced technology, keep monitoring everything and try to break those codes. I want to know what they're discussing in secret. Meanwhile, on Nexus Prime, Drive Lisa Parker was having her own discoveries. During their second day of meetings, she had been introduced to several alien scientists. Most were friendly but distant, willing to share basic information, but nothing detailed about their research or technology. One young alien had been different. His name was Zixtala, and he belonged to a species that looked like large insects, with 4 arms and compound eyes. He seemed nervous around the other aliens, but curious about humans. During a break in their formal meetings, he had approached Lisa privately. "Your species is very new to space travel," he had said in careful English. "My people, the Kalani, joined the Council 50 Earth years ago. We thought it would help us grow and learn." Lisa had been excited to meet someone willing to talk openly. "What has it been like? Has the Council helped your people advance?" Zixtala had looked around nervously before answering. "We were traveling to other stars and building new colonies when we joined. The Council said they would teach us better ways. Now we mainly focus on our home world and growing food for other species." Before Lisa could ask more questions, another alien had approached, and Zixtala had quickly moved away. But his words stayed in Lisa's mind. Why would a space-traveling species become farmers after joining an organization that promised to help them advance? Captain Morrison was having his own concerns during the formal council sessions. Earth's membership application was being discussed by representatives from over 100 different species. The meetings were held in a grand chamber with translators converting every word into dozens of languages. Ambassador Keffer and several other senior council members did most of the talking. They spoke about humanity's potential and the benefits of joining the galactic community. But Morrison noticed they often used phrases that seemed to have hidden meanings. Words like guided development and managed integration were repeated often. Dr. Helen Carter had requested permission to visit the station's medical facilities to learn about alien biology. Her visit had been approved, but with strict limits on what she could see. The alien doctors were polite, but kept steering her away from certain areas. In one laboratory, she had glimpsed storage containers filled with what looked like biological samples. When she asked about them, she was told they were for comparative species research, but wasn't allowed to examine them closely. One container had been labeled with symbols that her translation device said meant human genetic material, but when she pointed this out, her guide had quickly moved her to another room. Ryan Hughes was discovering that their communication access was more limited than they had first realized. His requests to contact other human ships or Earth directly were denied with explanations about security protocols during transition periods. When he tried to access general station information systems, he found that most databases were restricted. Late one night, Ryan decided to test the limits of their access. Using techniques he had learned in military communication training, he began probing the station's network carefully. What he found worried him. Their quarters were under constant surveillance, with cameras and listening devices monitoring everything. They did that. The next morning, Jake called another quiet meeting. This time they gathered in the ship's shuttle bay, which was the only place they could be sure was free from alien monitoring equipment. "We're not guests here," Jake told his team. "We're being watched and controlled. Everything we do is being recorded and analyzed." Lisa shared what Zixtala had told her about his people's experience. The Kalani were explorers like us before. They joined the council. Now they're described as agricultural specialists who rarely leave their home system. What if the council doesn't actually help species advance? Helen described the medical facilities and the genetic samples she had seen. They have biological material from many species, including humans, but we haven't given them any samples. How did they get human genetic data? Ryan had been thinking about the communication restrictions. They're not just limiting our access to protect us. They're studying how we communicate and think. This feels more like an intelligence gathering operation than diplomatic exchange. Jake looked at his team and made a decision that would change everything. "We need to find out what's really happening here, but we have to be careful. From now on, we assume we're being watched and listened to at all times. We'll continue our normal duties, but we'll also quietly investigate what the council is actually doing." Back on Earth, Commander Stevens was making progress breaking the alien encryption. The patterns were complex, but they followed mathematical rules that could be analyzed. What she was finding in the decoded messages made her blood run cold. The transmissions included references to Protocol 7 and discussions about the human problem. There were mentions of biological solutions and timeline acceleration. Most disturbing were references to 12 previous species that had been successfully integrated using something called containment measures. Stevens immediately took her findings to Admiral Bennett. When he read the decoded messages, his face went pale. "Get me everything you can on these 12 species they mentioned. I want to know what happened to them and what successful integration means." As Stevens worked through the night analyzing more intercepted messages, she began to understand that humanity had not been invited to join the Galactic Council as equals. They had been targeted for something much more sinister, and the process had already begun. Admiral Bennett stood in his secure briefing room, surrounded by stacks of classified files. Lieutenant Colonel Tony Rodriguez had been working for 2 weeks to find information about the 12 species mentioned in the intercepted alien communications. What he had discovered was deeply troubling. The pattern is consistent across all 12 cases, Rodriguez explained as he activated a holographic display. Each species was contacted by the Council shortly after achieving faster-than-light travel. All were described as aggressive explorers with rapid technological development. All joined the Council within 5 years of first contact. Bennett studied the timeline Rodriguez had created. What happened to them after joining? Rodriguez switched to another display showing current status reports. According to Council records, they all became peaceful, specialized societies focused on specific industries. The Harani went from building starships to growing crystals. The Valaks stopped exploring space and now manufacture textiles. The Kalani abandoned their colony ships to become agricultural specialists. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been working with Rodriguez to analyze the cultural changes. She was Earth's leading expert on how societies develop and change over time. These weren't natural evolutionary changes, she said. The speed and completeness of the transformations suggest external influence. Entire civilizations don't abandon space exploration in single generations, unless something forces them to. Bennett felt a chill as he understood the implications. The Council isn't a cooperative alliance. It's a control system designed to prevent other species from becoming threats. On Nexus Prime, Dr. Lisa Parker had been carefully building a relationship with Zixtala. The young Kalani scientist seemed eager to talk to someone from outside the Council structure, but was clearly afraid of being overheard. They had begun meeting in one of the station's many maintenance areas where there were fewer surveillance devices. My grandfather told me stories about the old days, Zixtala said as they examined some broken equipment that provided cover for their conversation. The Kalani had 17 colonies and were planning expeditions to other galaxies. We built ships that could travel for years between stars. Lisa pretended to study a damaged circuit panel while listening intently. What changed? Why did your people stop exploring? Zixtala's compound eyes shifted nervously. The Council offered us something called Harmony Protocols. They said it would help us develop sustainably and avoid the mistakes that had destroyed other civilizations. The protocols included new educational methods, economic systems, and medical programs. But those sound helpful, Lisa said, though she was beginning to suspect otherwise. At first they seemed to be, Zixtala replied. Our society became more peaceful. There were fewer conflicts and everyone seemed content. But gradually people stopped being interested in exploring space. New generations preferred staying home and working in agriculture. Within 30 years we had abandoned most of our colonies. Lisa felt a chill run through her. Did anyone try to resist these changes? Zixtala was quiet for a long moment. Some did. Scientists and explorers who said we were losing our identity, but they were labeled as dangerous elements who threatened social harmony. Most were sent for treatment to correct their antisocial tendencies. They came back different, calm and focused on farming instead of research. Meanwhile, Captain Morrison had been attending more council sessions and documenting everything he observed. The formal meetings followed predictable patterns, but he noticed that real decisions seemed to be made in private conversations between senior members. He also observed that newer council members, like the Kalani representatives, rarely spoke during debates. Dr. Helen Carter had been given permission to examine some of the biological samples in the station's medical facilities. What she found confirmed her worst suspicions. The samples weren't just for research purposes. They were being used to develop specialized compounds designed to affect specific species' brain chemistry. She discovered detailed studies of human neurology and psychology. The research focused on areas of the brain responsible for curiosity, aggression, and independent thinking. There were formulas for compounds that could reduce these traits while increasing compliance and contentment. Most disturbing were the test results showing these compounds had already been successfully used on other species. The files contained before and after psychological profiles that showed dramatic personality changes. Species that had once been described as bold and innovative were now characterized as peaceful and cooperative. Ryan Hughes had been quietly mapping the station's communication network and had discovered something significant. There was a hidden communication array in an unused section of the station that wasn't connected to the main systems. It appeared to be an emergency backup system that could send messages without going through council monitoring. That evening, Jake gathered his team in the shuttle bay for another secret meeting. Each officer shared what they had learned, and the picture that emerged was terrifying. The council uses biological agents to change how species think and behave, Helen explained. They identify traits they consider threatening, like curiosity and independence, then use drugs to suppress them. The process is gradual, so it seems like natural cultural evolution. Lisa described her conversations with Zixtala. His people went from star travelers to farmers in one generation. It wasn't choice, it was conditioning, and anyone who resisted was forced to undergo treatment that changed their personality. Morrison had been analyzing the council's historical records and found additional evidence. I've been looking at the official descriptions of member species. They all follow the same pattern. Former explorers and warriors are now described as specialists in peaceful industries. The council systematically eliminates competition by removing the drive to compete. Ryan had more disturbing news. I've found evidence that Earth is already being studied for the same process. There are detailed psychological profiles of human behavior and research into what biological agents might work on us. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. We need to warn Earth, but our communications are monitored. How can we get word back without alerting the council? Ryan had been thinking about this problem. There's an old emergency communication array in Section 7 that might not be monitored. If we can access it, we might be able to send a message home. Helen was worried about more immediate concerns. If they're already developing biological agents for humans, when do they plan to use them? The integration process seems to happen quickly once it starts. Lisa had been thinking about the timeline. Based on her conversations with Zixtala, from what I've learned, they usually begin within months of a species joining the council. They start with medical programs that are presented as beneficial health improvements. Morrison made a decision that would determine humanity's fate. We're going to split our efforts. Lisa and Ryan will work on getting a message to Earth through that emergency ray. Helen and I will try to gather more evidence about their biological programs. We need proof of what they're planning. As the meeting ended, each member of the crew understood the stakes. They weren't just diplomats anymore. They had become humanity's early warning system for a threat that could destroy everything. That made humans unique. The council's peaceful facade hid a system designed to turn explorers into farmers, warriors into pacifists, and freethinkers into compliant citizens. The next phase of their mission would be far more dangerous than anything they had trained for. They would need to operate as spies in the heart of an alien empire while maintaining their cover. As eager new council members, the survival of human independence depended on their ability to expose the truth before it was too late. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez had been working around the clock to find more information about the species that had supposedly gone extinct, rather than join the council. What he discovered in the archived databases made his hands shake as he read the files. The Thrakari had been a warrior species that refused the council's initial invitation. According to official records, they had died out due to a plague that struck their home world 50 years ago. But Rodriguez found earlier communications that told a different story. The Thrakari had been actively expanding their territory and building a military alliance with 3 other species. When the plague began, Dr. Vasquez examined the medical records from that time period. This wasn't a natural plague, she told Admiral Bennett during their morning briefing. The symptoms described matched biological weapons designed to target specific genetic markers. The Thrakari didn't die from disease, they were eliminated. Bennett felt sick as he read the reports. How many other species suffered the same fate? Rodriguez had found evidence of at least 6 species that had been wiped out after refusing to join the council or attempting to resist the integration process. The council maintains memorial databases for these extinct civilizations, but the real records show they were all eliminated systematically. Meanwhile, on Nexus Prime, Captain Morrison and Dr. Carter had managed to access restricted areas of the medical research facility. Using maintenance codes that Ryan had obtained from the station's computer network, they were able to enter laboratories that normal diplomatic visitors never saw. What they found was a massive biological weapons program, disguised as medical research. Hundreds of different compounds were being developed and tested, each designed to affect specific aspects of alien psychology and physiology. There were drugs to reduce aggression, suppress curiosity, increase compliance, and eliminate the desire for independence. Look at this, Carter whispered as she examined a computer terminal showing test results. They've been perfecting these compounds for centuries. Each species that joined the council was a test case for developing better control methods. Morrison photographed everything he could while Carter downloaded data files. The research showed that the Council's true leadership consisted of 5 ancient species that had achieved interstellar travel millions of years ago. These species called themselves the Shepherds and saw their role as managing younger civilizations to prevent them from becoming threats. The biological control system was their most refined method, but not their only one. Economic manipulation, cultural conditioning, and when necessary, direct military action were all tools used to maintain their control. Any species that showed signs of becoming too advanced or independent was targeted for correction or elimination. Drive Lisa Parker and Zixtala had been meeting secretly for several days, and she had learned much more about how the integration process worked. The Kelani scientist had become increasingly willing to share information as he realized that humans might be the first species in generations with a chance to resist. The process begins with medical assistance programs, Zixtala explained. As they hid in an abandoned storage area, Council doctors offer to help treat diseases and extend lifespans. The treatments work, but they contain additional compounds that gradually change brain chemistry. Lisa was recording everything on a hidden device. How long does it take for the changes to become permanent? For my people, it took about 10 years for the full transformation. Zixtala replied. The first generation that received treatment became less interested in exploration and more focused on domestic concerns. Their children grew up in this new culture and never developed the drive to leave their home world. Lisa felt a chill as she understood the implications. So within 2 generations, an entire civilization can be transformed from explorers to farmers without even realizing what happened to them. Zixtala nodded sadly. By the time anyone understood what was happening, it was too late. The people who might have resisted had been chemically altered to be passive, and the Council had complete records of our technology and defenses, so resistance would have been impossible anyway. Ryan Hughes had been working to access the emergency communication array. In the abandoned section of the station, the area was supposedly unused, but he had discovered it was actually a secret archive, maintained by some Council members who opposed the Shepherd's methods. The archive contained detailed records of every species that had been integrated or eliminated over the past 1,000 years. There were resistance communications, scientific analysis of the biological agents, and most importantly, the complete membership lists of both the Public Council and the secret Shepherd leadership. Ryan found communication logs from various species' final resistance movements. The messages painted a picture of desperate civilizations trying to warn others about the Council's true nature before being silenced forever. Some had tried to fight back militarily, while others had attempted to flee to distant galaxies. But all had ultimately failed. Most disturbing were the psychological profiles the Shepherds maintained on every species they encountered. Humans had been under observation for over a century, since the first radio signals had been detected from Earth. The profile described humans as extremely dangerous due to their rapid technological advancement, aggressive expansion tendencies, and resistance to authority. The Shepherd leadership had debated for decades about how to handle humanity. Some wanted to eliminate humans before they became a threat, while others argued for attempting integration first. The integration faction had won, but contingency plans for human elimination were already prepared if the biological control methods failed. Back on Earth, Commander Stevens had broken more of the intercepted communications, and the news was getting worse. The messages revealed that Council ships disguised as diplomatic vessels were already en route to Earth's solar system. These ships carried not just ambassadors, but teams of specialists equipped with biological agents, specifically designed to work on human physiology. Admiral Bennett was coordinating Earth's response with other military leaders around the planet. How long do we have before these ships arrive? Stevens checked her latest intercepts. Based on their communication schedules, I estimate 6 weeks at most. They're moving faster than originally planned because they're concerned about human intelligence gathering capabilities. Bennett had been hoping for more time to prepare defenses, but now realized they might already be too late. What about Morrison and his crew? Any word from them? Nothing through official channels, but I'm detecting some Unusual signals that might be attempts to communicate using emergency protocols, Stevens replied. If they're trying to reach us, it means they've discovered something important. Dr. Vasquez had been analyzing the biological agents mentioned in the intercepted communications. The good news is that human physiology is more complex and varied than most species they've dealt with. Our evolutionary history on Earth created natural resistance to many types of biological manipulation. What kind of resistance? Bennett asked. Humans evolved in an environment with constant biological threats like diseases, poisons, and parasites, Vasquez explained. Our immune systems and brain chemistry are more adaptable than species that evolved on worlds with less biological diversity. It might make their standard control methods less effective on us. Bennett felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. So we might be able to fight back in ways other species couldn't. Possibly, Vasquez said, but we need to know exactly what they're planning to use against us. Without that information, we're still vulnerable. On Nexus Prime, Morrison's team was preparing to take the biggest risk of their mission. They had gathered enough evidence to prove the Council's true nature, but they needed to get the information back to Earth. The emergency communication array was their only option, but using it would certainly expose their activities to Council security. Jake made the decision during their final planning meeting. We're going to transmit everything we've learned back to Earth, and then try to escape in the Discovery. Once they know we've been spying on them, the station will become a trap. The success of their mission and the future of human freedom now depended on whether they could get their warning home before the Council realized that humanity had discovered the truth about their hidden agenda. Admiral Bennett was awakened at 3 in the morning by an urgent call from Commander Stevens. She had intercepted a priority message from the Council, requesting immediate implementation of what they called standard integration protocols on Earth. The timeline had been moved up and Council ships were demanding permission to establish facilities in major human cities within 2 weeks. They're not waiting for our formal membership to be approved, Stevens explained as Bennett rushed to the command center. The message indicates they're concerned about human intelligence capabilities and want to begin the integration process. Immediately, Bennett read the official Council communication with growing alarm. The protocols included mandatory genetic screening of all humans, educational reforms to be implemented in schools worldwide, and the establishment of Council medical centers in 50 major population centers. Each requirement was presented as a benefit to humanity. But Bennett now understood their true purpose. Drive Vasquez had been working through the night to analyze the integration protocols. The genetic screening is to identify humans who might be naturally resistant to their biological agents, she explained. The educational reforms will condition children to be more compliant and less curious. The medical centers are where they'll distribute the mind control compounds, disguised as health treatments. Bennett activated the emergency military communication network that connected him to defense leaders around the planet. This is Admiral Bennett with a priority alpha alert. All units are to prepare for potential hostile contact. The Alien Council is not what it appears to be. On Nexus Prime, Captain Morrison's team was making their final preparations to transmit their evidence back to Earth. Ryan had successfully accessed the emergency communication array and discovered it was more sophisticated than they had hoped. The system could send quantum encrypted messages that would be nearly impossible for the Council to intercept or decode. But they faced a new problem. Ambassador Kethfer had requested a private meeting with Morrison for that evening, and refusing would certainly raise suspicions. They would need to complete their transmission and escape attempt while Morrison was in the meeting, leaving him behind temporarily. I'll keep Kethfer busy as long as possible, Morrison told his team. You 3 get to the Discovery and prepare for immediate departure. Once you start transmitting our evidence, they'll detect the communication and realize what we've been doing. Dr. Carter had made one final discovery in the medical research files that changed everything. Jake, they're not just planning to control us. The research shows they're developing a biological weapon that will kill any human who shows resistance to the integration process. If the mind control compounds don't work, they'll eliminate anyone who might lead a rebellion. Morrison felt cold as he understood the full scope of the threat. How many humans would survive if they implemented this plan? Based on their projections, maybe 20% of the population, Carter replied. They consider it an acceptable loss to ensure the remaining humans are completely compliant. The meeting with Keffer took place in his private chambers deep within the station. Morrison arrived precisely on time and found the ambassador waiting with several other senior council members he didn't recognize. The atmosphere in the room was tense and formal, rather than the friendly diplomatic meetings they had held before. Captain Morrison, we need to discuss some concerns that have arisen regarding your crew's activities. Keffer began without his usual pleasantries. There have been reports of humans accessing restricted areas and attempting to gather classified information. Morrison kept his expression neutral while his mind raced. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Ambassador. My crew has followed all protocols and stayed within authorized areas. One of the other aliens stepped forward. It was tall and thin with pale skin and completely black eyes. Captain, we have complete surveillance records of this station. We know exactly where your people have been and what they have seen. Morrison realized they had been caught, but decided to continue the pretense as long as possible, to give his team more time. If there have been misunderstandings, I'm sure we can resolve them. Perhaps there were translation errors or navigation mistakes. Keffer activated a holographic display, showing security footage of Carter and Morrison in the restricted medical laboratories. These are not misunderstandings, Captain. Your species is attempting to spy on Council operations before your integration has been completed. Meanwhile, Lisa, Carter, and Ryan were moving quickly through the station's corridors toward the emergency communication ray. They had divided their evidence into multiple data packages that would transmit simultaneously to ensure at least some information reached Earth even if they were discovered. The abandoned section of the station was dark and filled with old equipment, but Ryan had mapped the route carefully. They reached the communication array without being detected and began the transmission sequence. The quantum encryption process would take 15 minutes to send all their data. Signal is strong and the connection to Earth is stable, Ryan reported as the transmission began. But I'm also detecting increased security activity throughout the station. They know something is happening. Back in Keffer's chambers, Morrison was running out of options. The alien leaders had presented overwhelming evidence of his team's activities and were demanding immediate answers about human intentions. Captain, your species was invited to join the Council because we believed humans could benefit from our guidance, the pale alien said in a voice that sounded like ice cracking. But your actions suggest humans are inherently deceptive and untrustworthy. Morrison decided it was time to drop the pretense. We discovered what you really do to species that join the Council. The biological control agents, the elimination of anyone who resists, the systematic destruction of independent civilizations. We know what you are. Keffer's expression didn't change, but Morrison could see anger in his golden eyes. And what exactly do you think we are, Captain? Your predators, Morrison replied. You've been conquering the galaxy for millions of years, not through military force, but through deception and biological warfare. You eliminate any species that might challenge your dominance while pretending to offer friendship and cooperation. The transmission had been running for 10 minutes when Council security forces began moving toward their location. Carter monitored the security frequencies while Lisa and Ryan finished uploading the last data packages containing evidence of the elimination protocols and biological weapons research. We have company coming fast, Carter warned. Multiple security teams are heading this way. Ryan checked the transmission status. 3 more minutes to complete the upload. Everything about the Shepherds, the integration process, and their plans for humanity will be in Admiral Bennett's hands. Lisa was already preparing their escape route. The service tunnels connect to the docking bay where the Discovery is waiting. If we can reach the ship, we might be able to break free before they can stop us. Back on Earth, Admiral Bennett had received the first data packages from Morrison's transmission and was coordinating humanity's response. The evidence was overwhelming and terrifying, but it also provided crucial information about Council weaknesses and tactics. They've never faced a species that discovered their true nature. Before the integration process began, Bennett told his staff every other species was caught off guard after they were already partially compromised. We have an advantage no one else has had. Dr. Vasquez had analyzed the biological weapons data and found the weakness they needed. The compounds are designed to work on species with homogeneous genetics and stable brain chemistry. Human genetic diversity and our history of adapting to different environments makes us naturally resistant to their standard formulations. Commander Stevens was tracking the incoming Council ships and had more good news. Their vessels are designed for intimidation and surprise rather than military combat. They're not expecting resistance, so they're not heavily armed or shielded. In Kethver's chambers, the confrontation was reaching its conclusion. The ambassador had stopped pretending to be friendly and was speaking with the cold authority of a species that had controlled the galaxy for eons. Humans will undergo integration whether you cooperate or not, Kethver declared. Your choice is to accept guidance peacefully or face elimination, like the other species that chose to resist. Morrison stood up slowly. There's a third option you haven't considered. And what would that be, Captain? Morrison smiled for the first time since arriving on Nexus Prime. Humans don't surrender, and we don't die quietly. If you want to control us, you'll have to fight us for every inch. At that moment, alarms began sounding throughout the station. As Council security discovered the unauthorized transmission to Earth, the secret war between humanity and the Galactic Council had officially begun, and the outcome would determine the fate of free will in the galaxy. The alarms echoing through Nexus Prime meant Captain Morrison's team had successfully transmitted their evidence to Earth, but now they were trapped on a hostile station. Morrison stood facing Ambassador Kethver and his colleagues, knowing that the pretense of diplomatic cooperation was over forever. You have made a grave mistake, Captain, Kethver said as security forces surrounded the chamber. Your species will now face the full consequences of defying the Council. Morrison kept his expression calm, despite knowing he might not survive the next few hours. The mistake was yours for underestimating humans. You've controlled the galaxy for so long you forgot what real resistance looks like. Meanwhile, Lisa, Carter, and Ryan were fighting their way through the station toward the Discovery. The transmission to Earth had been completed, but Council security forces were converging on their position from all directions. They moved through maintenance tunnels and service corridors while alien voices echoed behind them, in languages they couldn't understand. 2 more sections to the docking bay, Ryan reported as they climbed through a ventilation shaft. But there, ceiling blast doors throughout the station. We might get trapped. Carter checked her scanner and found Council forces moving to block their escape routes. They're herding us toward the docking bay. This could be a trap. Lisa realized the Council's tactics. They want to capture us alive to find out how much we learned and who else might know. That gives us an advantage because they won't use lethal force immediately. On Earth, Admiral Bennett was coordinating humanity's response. As more data arrived from Morrison's transmission, the evidence revealed not only the Council's plans for Earth, but also detailed information about their military capabilities and weaknesses. For the first time in this crisis, Bennett felt they had a real chance to fight back. The Council ships approaching our system are designed to intimidate primitive civilizations, Bennett explained to the Emergency Defense Committee. Their weapons are intended for orbital bombardment of defenseless planets, not combat with prepared opponents. Drive Vasquez had been analyzing the biological weapons data and developing countermeasures. We can synthesize compounds that will neutralize their mind control agents. Human genetic diversity means we can create treatments that will work on our entire population. Commander Stevens had more encouraging news. I've been monitoring their communications and they're panicking. They've never faced a situation where their target species discovered the truth before integration began. Their entire system depends on deception and surprise. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez had been working with military units around the planet to prepare Earth's defenses. Our spacecraft were designed for exploration and scientific research, but they're more maneuverable than the Council ships. We can modify them for combat using the technical data Morrison's team provided. Back on Nexus Prime, Morrison was being escorted to a detention facility. while Kethver coordinated the Council's response to humanity's defiance. The ambassador was speaking with the Shepherd leadership through encrypted communications, his calm demeanor replaced by barely controlled anger. The humans have transmitted detailed information about our operations to their home world, he reported. They possess evidence of our integration protocols and elimination procedures. The response from the Shepherds was immediate and harsh. All pretense of peaceful integration was to be abandoned. Council military forces were authorized to use whatever methods necessary to bring humanity under control or eliminate them as a threat. Morrison was placed in a cell designed to hold dangerous prisoners, but he wasn't alone. Other aliens who had been caught resisting the Council's authority were held in nearby cells. Some had been there for years, while others were recent rivals who had tried to warn their species about the integration process. One prisoner was a member of the Kalani species who introduced himself as Vexthala. "You are the human who has been asking questions about the Council," he said through the cell barriers. "My nephew Zixtala told me about your conversations." Morrison realized this might be his chance to organize resistance from within the station. "How many prisoners are there who still oppose the Council more than they realize?" Vexthala replied, "Many of us have been pretending to be reformed while secretly maintaining contact with resistance. Cells on our home worlds." Meanwhile, Lisa, Carter, and Ryan reached the docking bay where the Discovery was waiting, but found it heavily guarded by Council security forces. The trap had been set, and there seemed to be no way to reach their ship without being captured. 30 guards between us and the Discovery. Carter counted through her scanner, and they have energy weapons that could disable us instantly. But Ryan had noticed something the Council security forces hadn't considered. "Look at the other ships in this bay. Some of them belong to species that joined the Council recently. If we can reach one of those ships instead, we might find allies." Lisa spotted a vessel with Kalani markings docked near the far wall. Zixtala mentioned that some of his people still oppose what happened to their civilization. "If we can reach that ship, they might help us." The 3 humans made their way carefully around the edge of the docking bay, avoiding the main security perimeter. When they reached the Kalani ship, they found Zixtala himself working on external repairs. "Dr. Parker, what are you doing here?" he asked in surprise when he saw them approaching. Lisa quickly explained their situation and their need to escape the station. Zixtala looked around nervously, but then made a decision. That surprised them all. "My ship is faster than your Discovery, and it has stealth systems the Council doesn't know about," he said. "I can get you away from the station, but we'll all be fugitives afterward." The escape from Nexus Prime was chaotic and dangerous. Zixtala's ship slipped away from the station using routes known only to maintenance personnel, while Council forces continued searching for the humans in the main docking bay. By the time they realized the humans had escaped, the ship was already jumping to hyperspace. Back in the detention center, Morrison and the other prisoners were planning their own breakout. The discovery that dozens of aliens from various species were secretly resisting the Council had changed everything. What had seemed like hopeless individual rebellions was actually part of a galaxy-wide underground movement. If the humans can actually fight back successfully, it will inspire other species to rebel. Vexthala explained, "The Council's power depends on everyone believing resistance is impossible." 3 weeks later, the Council fleet arrived in Earth's solar system, expecting to find a primitive world ready for easy conquest. Instead, they encountered Admiral Bennett's defensive fleet, armed with weapons developed using captured Council technology and crewed by humans who refused to surrender their freedom. The battle was fierce but brief. Human ships using hit and run tactics destroyed or disabled most of the Council vessels, while Earth-based defenses prevented any from reaching the planet's surface. The few Council ships that survived fled back toward their own territory, carrying news that would shake the foundation of their empire. The successful defense of Earth triggered rebellions throughout the galaxy as species that had been suppressed for generations suddenly realized they could fight back. Morrison and the other prisoners escaped from Nexus Prime during the chaos and joined the growing resistance movement. Zixtala became one of the leaders of the new Galactic Alliance that formed to oppose the Council's tyranny. His people, the Kalani, were among the first to break free from their forced pacification and resume their exploration of space. Within 5 years, the old council structure had collapsed completely. The shepherd species that had controlled the galaxy for millions of years found themselves facing united opposition from hundreds of worlds they had once dominated. Some surrendered and accepted integration into the new democratic alliance, while others retreated to distant regions of space. Earth became the headquarters of the new galactic alliance, and Captain Morrison was promoted to admiral in charge of exploration fleets that carried the message of freedom to species throughout the galaxy. Dr. Parker established research centers where humans and aliens worked together as equals to advance science and technology for everyone's benefit. The galaxy was finally free, and humanity had proven that sometimes the newest species could teach the oldest ones what it truly meant to be civilized. The Council's hidden agenda against Earth had failed because they had underestimated the one thing that made humans special: their absolute refusal to give up their freedom no matter what the cost.